This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 27th of August, 2021, and I am AX.
And I am Serbia.
I am CS. In the headlines, in case you missed them, Daily Nation, a man under pressure. In the Standard, Ruto elite GSU security replaced. In the Star, new radical plan for president to hire and fire DP. And in the People Daily, why the state changed Ruto security detail. X, why don't you kick us off?
With pleasure. So given the coverage of today's papers, I have been trying to understand why the Deputy President's security went through a reshuffling yesterday. While we have been reassured that this is a routine measure, we are also in a season of high politics. In this season of high politics, we are reminded that politics is theatre. So what exactly are we watching right now? Allow me to unpack it. First, we are watching a man with political Munchausen syndrome. Munchausen syndrome is a mental illness where somebody pretends to be ill or deliberately produces symptoms of illness in themselves. Put simply, Ruto is the boy who cried wolf. If you only listened to Ruto, you would think that he was left as defenseless as a goldfish in a bowl, when in fact, his security detail was replaced, not removed. He is still enjoying state protection despite the fact that in everything but name, he is not a state employee. Thus, we are witnessing something far more interesting. Yesterday, we were reminded that Ruto is enjoying state resources. He continues to use those state resources to campaign for office and castigate the government that provides them. Clearly, Ruto has never heard of not biting the hand that sustains you. However, both of these observations are not the full picture. Whenever something happens in politics, we must ask the cardinal question, cui bono, or who benefits? Because the person who benefits in an action is more likely to have orchestrated that action. Now, Ruto has misrepresented the situation, painting the reshuffle as targeted removal. Therefore, who benefits from this narrative? The answer is William Ruto. Were you expecting someone else? He spins the narrative days after the president called on him to resign or fulfill his constitutional duty, aka do your job. While this functions to elicit the sympathy that apparently sustains him, there is more to it than that. By telling us that he's being targeted, Ruto is distracting us. 2 days ago, we found out that evidence from Ruto's ICC case will be used against Gisheru, thereby linking Ruto ever more to a man who could land him in prison for war crimes. Let's not forget the fact that he seemed to have lied about calling Equity Bank to secure a 15 billion shilling loan. To distract the nation from all of this, Ruto needed something big.
Yes, indeed.
And what's bigger than claiming to be the victim of a political attack? Now, what am I saying here? Yesterday, what we saw was a boy who will never stop crying wolf. He will cry wolf to distract us from the milk he spilled in the kitchen. He will cry wolf to stop himself from being held accountable. And he will cry wolf just because he can. What we saw yesterday was the William Ruto campaign strategy. Read it and weep.
The Woishe strategy.
Yes.
Serbia, what's your submission?
Well, recently, Ruto attempted to create alarm by suggesting that BBI was advocating for an imperial presidency.
Indeed.
An imperial presidency is one that overreaches its powers and is often shrouded in secrecy. This means unlimited exercise of presidential authority which goes beyond what the constitution allows. But if anything is to go by, the BBI was set to tame presidential supremacy by distributing power to others within the executive. William Ruto has revealed through his solo political interactions and his defiance of existing authority that he could be a looming threat over our democracy. His actions consistently show us that he will not hesitate to act unilaterally to achieve his own purposes. We are ignoring these signs to our detriment. We hypothesize that with a possible Ruto presidency, we might just slide back into the very imperial presidency that he accuses others of. Let me explain. One of the key hallmarks of an authoritarian regime is the personality cult. William Ruto, just like other populist authoritarians before him, has understood how crucial his own individual persona is to his ultimate goal of power. He has established a personality cult to the creation of his mass movement called hustlerism. He has characterized the movement with symbols like the wheelbarrow and added propaganda driven by handouts and half-baked economic theories.
Amen.
This is so reminiscent of Stalin and his cult of personality. Stalin was once upon a time a mere shadow of his predecessor, Lenin, the great Bolshevik hero. Lenin did not want Stalin to succeed him because he saw him as impatient and disloyal. Do these traits sound familiar in our country today?
Indeed.
To get around the roadblock, Stalin hatched a plan. He started identifying himself with the proletariat, or the workers. Stalin could also be seen taking pictures with ordinary folk. He also started interacting with children and engaged in public gift-giving, which became a key element of his personality cult. Before long, the masses were chanting Stalin's name even in their sleep. Stalin's cult of personality also adopted processions and devotions through the use of parades and gatherings, such as those being held in Karen. An important feature of an authoritarian regime is, one, what it promises in order to get to power, and two, the means it uses to get to power. In particular, it uses tools such as appealing to emotions, which then give legitimacy to its political intentions as a necessary evil to combat societal problems like class discrimination. Same as Ruto and his hustlerism. And once in power, Ruto will legitimize any tyrannical action as a necessary evil to combat other problems like those who might oppose him. Ruto has this blueprint and will action on it. So we must ponder, what if we allow this seed of authoritarianism to grow? What does it portend for our future?
Indeed. And let me pick up where you have just left off.
All right.
This high priest of duplicity, decorated prince of doublespeak, Mr. Bwana Asifiwe, William Samoei Ruto, chief captain of the no campaign against the 2010 constitution. This man traversed the country in a red t-shirt telling us katiba hii ni mbichi and urging us to reject it.
Imagine.
This same man is now shamelessly trying to robe himself with the revolutionary credentials of the fine men and women who agitated for years for constitutional reform. Clearly, his infamous and alleged appetite for plunder knows no limits. It is now plundering history.
Absolutely great.
If Ruto can stand on a podium in front of Kenyans while cameras are rolling and proceed to tell us that he fought against Moi's Imperial Presidency for 30 years.
All the gains we had, we fought for almost 30 years against an Imperial Presidency. The BBI was going to install the Imperial Presidency in a very unprecedented way.
If this man who campaigned against the current constitution is now pretending to be its most devout defender, if such utter falsehood becomes him, then what does this tell us about the heights he will ascend to and the depths he will descend to, all in an effort to deceive his way into State House?
Preach.
It is no wonder bottoms up economics does not make sense. Surely, how can it if it comes from such a practiced guru of falsehoods?
Ooh, how can it?
If he had told such lies in Uganda, we can maybe forgive him for trying to look good. But he is lying to Kenyans.
Yes, of course.
How can he try to convince Kenyans that he was part of the struggle to bring down Moi? Kenyans know that when young professionals, civil society, and the young Turks were in the streets advocating for reform, William Ruto was making money supplying YK92 t-shirts. And by the way, according to Cyrus Jirongo, Ruto never even delivered the t-shirts, even though he was paid.
William Ruto then, after the 1992 campaign, where we lobbied for votes for Moi, he then looked for friendship with me through Fred Amayo. And they pushed very hard. I was a bit hesitant, but because of something that had happened And I talked to Amayo. I told Fred Amayo, this young man, you brought him into my office and asked me to give him a contract to supply 10,000 T-shirts. You remember he did not supply the 10,000. Instead, he brought 1,000 T-shirts and repeatedly delivered the same T-shirts 10 times. So we ended up paying, or I ended up paying him 1.2 million shillings because a T-shirt then was about 120 shillings for the delivery of only 1,000 shillings. What he did was he tried and corrupted the young boys who were in the stores. And he would deliver 1,000 T-shirts, they give it back to him. He delivers again, they give it back to him 10 times. Yes. So I paid him 1.2 million instead of paying him for 1,000 T-shirts, which would have been 120,000.
But even so, this man has stooped to a new level. Not only did he insult our intelligence with Matako Jew, at least if you insult my intelligence, you assume I have some intelligence. Hata kama ni kidogo. But now he is telling us that he fought against Moi and the Imperial Presidency, and that is why the BBI is bad.
Oh, come on.
He is no longer insulting our intelligence. He is assuming we have none. The fact that he would carry us malenge and think we would so easily forget our recent history now also has me wondering this. What was it that Mzee Moi knew that made him, in his sunset years, completely decline to give audience to William Ruto? Mzee Moi had a low opinion of Mr. Bwana Asifiwe. It is a question that maybe we all should ask ourselves. Because when you see a wise old man reject someone, it is a herald of what the young should run away from in trepidation.
Oh, why?
Now, we have a three-part criteria that we use to judge our headlines. We ask ourselves 3 questions. Is the headline topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, thoughtful or just plain lazy? Just to remind you of the headlines, in Daily Nation, a man under pressure. In the Standard, Ruto, elite GSU security replaced. In the Star, new radical plan for president to hire and fire DP. And in the People Daily, why the state changed Ruto security detail. What do you think, guys?
To be honest, the headline I like the least is the Standard. It is the least creative. It is the most obvious, and I am so happy, so blessed with the pleasure of chucking it away. Yes.
What do you say, Sabia?
2 are repeat headlines, right? One is, come again, Ruto?
Elite GSU security replaced, and why the state changed Ruto security detail.
Okay, I'll go with the People's Daily, which says that...
I agree. I think it's factual because it gives an explanation why the state changed Ruto security detail. It's factual, it's relevant, and it's thoughtful because it gives an explanation in a time of a lot of sensation. But Daily Nation, we also give a nod to it, a man under pressure. I think Ruto is also being exposed for his many contradictions. And so we give it a tie between Daily Nation and People Daily. And now for our final thought, the man who killed apartheid.
Yes, so this week we have been looking at assassinations. On Tuesday, we look at the assassin Alexander Orlov, the loyal servant of Joseph Stalin. On Wednesday, we looked at Pope John I, who was assassinated on September 28, 1978. And yesterday, we looked at Jamal Khashoggi, who died in 2018. As CS said, today we are looking at the book, The Man Who Killed Apartheid. In The Man Who Killed Apartheid, Harris Dusometsis and Gary Loughran meticulously account the assassination of Dr. Hendrik Verwood to uncover what truly motivated his assassin, Dimitri Safendas. Before we get to their findings, let me tell you a little bit about the assassination and the men involved. Verwood was the Prime Minister of South Africa and the architect of apartheid. A fervent Afrikaner nationalist, Verwood cemented segregation in South Africa, creating the philosophical, social, and economic ethos that upheld the system. On the 6th of September 1966, Verwood was assassinated by Dimitri Tsafendas, a Greek Mozambican. Tsafendas stabbed Verwood to death, stabbing him 4 times before he was apprehended on the floor of South Africa's parliament in Cape Town. As soon as he was apprehended, the South African state began engaging in a long cover-up, painting Tsafendas as a lone schizophrenic wolf whose actions were determined by, and get this, a tapeworm. The state made sure to reiterate that Tsafendas acted alone and never politically. In fact, it was the same tactic they used 6 years earlier when another man, David Pratt, tried to kill Verwood. But is this truly what happened? In both instances, no. According to Dusamesits and Lochran, the South African state engaged in a cover-up, not just to hide the crime, but to hide what motivated the crime, Tsafendas' hatred of apartheid. As evidence, the authors collected over 12,000 pages of documents and conducted 137 interviews with 69 people. In fact, the book was a condensed version of an 861,603 word report that demonstrated that Tsafenda acted politically. But again, why does it matter if Tsafenda acted politically? It matters because politics is powerful. Tsafenda assassinating Verwood because he was mentally ill can be ignored. But Tsafenda assassinating Verwood because he was, and I quote, a dictator and a tyrant who oppressed his people is a condemnation of apartheid. It is a condemnation of Verwood's policies and a judgment whose verdict was death. It matters that Tsafenda acted politically because it is a lot easier to rally behind a political prisoner than a schizophrenic one. And the fact that the South African state denied this association reveals what they thought of the political, that they themselves too thought it was powerful, and the state sought to deny Tsafenda this power. And they might have succeeded were it not for Dusametsits and Lochran's work. Yes.
All right, so I am going to talk about Hendrik Verwood, who was assassinated in the book. A feared authoritarian, Verwood was regarded as the chief architect of apartheid. He symbolized racism and brutality which still haunts South Africans to this day. Verwood has often been compared to the worst dictators in history. He stood for white nationalism and greatly expanded apartheid by branding the system as a policy of good neighborliness. Tsafendas, the assassin, went as far as labeling Verwood as Hitler's best student, since he adopted some of Hitler's Nuremberg laws in his oppression model. Tsafenda was attempting to end apartheid when he crafted this foolproof plan to eliminate Verwood. When Verwood was killed in 1966, opponents of his regime rejoiced, but apartheid wasn't completely eliminated until 30 years later. He was instead replaced by a tougher Afrikaner nationalist who was every bit and more an apartheid social engineer. This cemented the theory that authoritarian regimes operate almost like monarchies. The resilience of these regimes, even after eliminating individuals, reflects the durability of these systems. This is because there is always someone else ready to take up the mantle and continue the reign of terror to ensure the stability of these regimes. Many authoritarian states are known to have tight control over information that will potentially be detrimental to the regime. Any information they deem unfavorable is quickly quashed. That is why the South African apartheid regime went to great lengths to make sure no one knew the truth behind the assassination. They reacted claiming that Tsafendas was mentally ill, and this is what made him assassinate Verwood. Had they told people the truth, that the assassination was politically motivated, perhaps apartheid would have ended sooner. This is because people would have been inspired by a sane person acting politically, and they would have joined the liberation fight. George Orwell, in his book 1984, says that tyrannies attempt to make understanding the real world impossible, seeking to replace it with phantoms and lies. Something our deputy president is adept at doing.
I was about to
From
say.
his 15 billion equity bank loan story to telling us that UDA built roads, he is a master of deceit who has sacrificed truth at the altar of political expediency.
Wow.
And I like what you said about, tyranny is always having someone to replace someone else who may even be as worse. Reminds me of the monster hydra, cut one head off
To grow in its place.
to grow in its place unless you cut off all the heads. Now, Allow us to paint you a picture. Safendas was born in Maputo to a Greek father from Crete and a Mozambican mother. At the age of 3, he was sent to live with his grandmother and aunt in the Greek community of Alexandria in Egypt. He emigrated to South Africa at the age of 21, where his taste for politics came alive. He later went to Canada, crossed over to the USA, then back to Greece, where he fought alongside communist guerrillas in the mountains. He then moved to Portugal, and from there he spent 12 years of his life roaming from country to country throughout Western Europe and the Middle East, before finally returning to Mozambique and then crossing over to South Africa. It was there that he found the black population was terribly oppressed by the strict apartheid regime. This was a man who was very politically aware and whose roots were of mixed heritage. A man who had traveled across Africa, the Americas, Europe, and the Middle East, and who had therefore witnessed the vast and rich tapestry of humanity. A man who was a product of the diversity of the human family and who had spent his life traversing the globe and actively living amongst a myriad of societies, ethnicities, and cultures. The sum of his lived experience was antithetical to the very notion of racial segregation. So when he finally arrived in South Africa for the second time, and he encountered a government that enforced a policy rooted in racial hygiene and racial hierarchy, a government which misengineered the law to achieve vile ends and oppress multitudes on the basis of race, the truth he knew, the truth he had lived and believed, welled up inside him as a sense of duty and bubbled to the surface, transforming him into a crusader for justice, even if it required him undertaking the illegal to restore the lawful. And although that may seem paradoxical, natural law proponents would readily argue that something can be indeed illegal yet unlawful, and vice versa. Apartheid was legal, but it was not lawful. That which is lawful essentially derives from a higher truth or moral standard. In contrast, legality is often simply a function of legislation or bylaws and the like, which can easily be corrupted even from inception. Lawfulness, however, goes to the heart of what is right or wrong, regardless of what may be legislated. This is precisely why early church fathers like Thomas Aquinas, who was also a moral and legal philosopher, declared, "Lex inuista non est et lex." An unjust law is no law at all. Safendas knew that apartheid, though legal by dint of legislation, was unjust and therefore unlawful. And his entire life testified in agreement. He was therefore moved to militate against this unlawfulness by making a political statement, targeting the architect of apartheid in the corridors of the parliament where these unjust laws were crafted. The reason the courts were used to label him insane was because they knew a guilty verdict would lend legitimacy to his political stand and thus inspire revolution, whereas labeling him a madman and setting him free would avert the spark of revolution.
Great analysis, yeah.
This has been the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines. Thank you for joining us. Kindly catch us on Pang Free to Air, Go TV, and subscribe on YouTube and switch on notification. Today has been a day where we had a winning headline from both the Daily Nation and the People Daily. And we leave you with this quote: "Truth can recognize error, but error cannot recognize truth."
Oh, wow.
Do have a great weekend.
Good night.